Training camp is just under a week away for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and even though there are plenty of reasons to be excited about what this group can accomplish in 2024, there are also some very important questions that hope to be answered over the course of training camp, including, are the stars really healthy? And how effective is Riley Leonard going to be as a passer? All that more and coming up in today's edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Welcome into another edition of Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. And today is Thursday, July 25th. And thank you for getting your day started right here by making this your first listen of the day. My name is Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports. And this show is free and available on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. If you are watching along on YouTube, this is a reminder. Please like that video below, subscribe to the channel, or if you're listening to the podcast, please take a quick second, rate the show 5 stars, leave a nice review, and of course, subscribe there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Okay, in just a second here, I'm going to be joined by Luke Smith to talk about Notre Dame Shamrock Series uniforms, as well as Lincoln Riley's quote about the future of the Notre Dame-USC rivalry. And then we share our 5 burning questions before Notre Dame enters training camp last week. And I realized that as I bring Luke on for the first time in a few weeks, some of you watching, listening might not be familiar with our history together. Luke and I actually had a Notre Dame football podcast called Sons of Saturday Irish a few years ago before I joined the Locked On Podcast Network. Luke is going to be a big part of the show, has been a big part of the show since the moment that it launched, and he's going to be around a lot throughout the football season. Had a really, really fun conversation with him today. I hope you enjoy it. All right, we got Luke Smith back on the show, and I can just tell by looking at him that he's had enough of the summer. He's ready to go for football season, kind of working on a beard right now. But before we get to our 5 burning questions entering training camp, we got to talk about Notre Dame's new Shamrock Series uniforms for the game against Army in Yankee Stadium. What do you think of the Wolf of Wall Street inspired promotion and the actual jerseys?
So I do have to say I have not had the time to actually watch that video yet. I felt like that just with it muted, seeing all the yelling, office probably wasn't the best place to watch that. So still need to do that tonight. But the jerseys, this is going to mark the 3rd time I've ever actually liked the Shamrock Series uniforms. Love the slate color of the jersey, and the way the ND sticks out on the shoulders is great. I see why some people might not love the numbers and think they're a little too shiny, but that to me feels like something that might just look better on the players or in person themselves. So job well done joining the Vegas game 2 years ago and the Dallas game in 2013 as the 2 Shamrock Series uniforms that I've liked.
Yeah, I like these a lot. I do have the same concerns about the numbers. I just think they're too big, and the font just looks weird to me. It looks like that S doodle that you would draw in elementary school where it's like 3 lines stacked on top of each other. The
Superman thing, right?
Yeah, the Superman S. That's basically what all the numbers look like on this uniform. As for the Wolf of Wall Street thing, you didn't really miss much. It's Marcus Freeman just basically reciting that one sign where he's like, I choose winning every single time. I did find it hilarious that Notre Dame would sort of partner in a way with the movie Wolf of Wall Street right after doing The Hangover, because those are both very crude R-rated movies, both of which I loved, by the way. I would consider The Hangover and Wolf of Wall Street as 2 of like some of my favorite movies of all time. But when you think of those movies and you think of Notre Dame, not really a whole lot in common.
I would agree. That's it's a bit surprising, but they've made the most out of it in still a PG fashion. At least that's what you're telling me about this most recent one, which is what I would expect it to be.
Yeah, I like the Hangover one a little bit more, but this was still good and it was fun. And I think the Fighting Irish media team does continue to do creative stuff, and they get Marcus Freeman to do some things that I'm genuinely surprised any college football coach would do. Although then again, did you see that video of Lane Kiffin doing a TikTok dance?
I've not seen that.
Your life is better off without it. So I would actually encourage you to not look it up after. But basically, like, for a guy who made so much fun of Brian Kelly for dancing with the recruit, this is a million times worse. And if you're watching or listening to this and haven't seen it again, probably best to stay away. But if you're really interested, go check it out. But speaking of coaches, Lincoln Riley made some news at his first Big Ten Media Days. To some, he was asked about the Notre Dame-USC rivalry. He had a long quote about it, all read off an abbreviated version because we don't have all day here. Quote, he would love to keep it. I know it means a lot to a lot of people, the purists in you, no doubt. Now, if you get in a position where you have got to make a decision on what's best for USC to help us win a championship versus keeping that, shoot, then you got to look at it. Now, then he would go on to say that this really isn't the first example of teams around the country having to sacrifice their rivalry games because of conference realignment. But even though I genuinely enjoy making fun of Lincoln Riley whenever I can, and particularly his demeanor, one, and his continued pursuit to avoid a tough schedule, I actually didn't think he said anything here that was, that bad or that big of a deal.
The first thing I said to you is that people were going to make a big deal out of nothing over this one. I do think it's kind of interesting that Lincoln Riley is commenting on the future of the Notre Dame-USC rivalry, because I don't think either of us expects him to be at SC after the season. I think we both think he'll be in the NFL after this. I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but I do believe that.
I used to think that last season was going to be his last one at USC, and then he'd follow Caleb Williams to the NFL. But I think that the stock for Lincoln Riley, I don't want to say has plummeted, but it is not nearly the same as it was a year ago after they went 7-5 last season in the Pac-12. And now they enter 2024 with probably a better overall team, despite the fact that they lost Caleb Williams. But their schedule, man, is just so brutal.
It's not great. LSU, Michigan, Washington, Penn State, Wisconsin. I think there's somebody else in there too that I may have just forgotten. That should be good too. But they could struggle this year and have a better team than last year. There's no doubt about that. Now, as it pertains to the Notre Dame-USC rivalry, I feel like, well, Lincoln Riley made a decent point on that other schools have had to sacrifice their rivalries. Texas and Texas A&M comes to mind, actually. I don't think this is going to change anything. I think there's too much history on both sides to let it go by the wayside. And frankly, I think it's mutually beneficial to two universities who do have wide-ranging alumni bases across the country to let this thing just evaporate.
Yeah, and I think too many people on both sides of the fence here would be really upset. Notre Dame certainly wants to keep it. If the rivalry were to end, I think they would be almost entirely due to USC, because there's no reason for Notre Dame to not schedule them every single year. But I understand what he's saying. He's probably looking at a slate this year and thinking, wow, we have an absolute gauntlet. So even if they are a good team, they're going to lose some games because they play LSU, they play Wisconsin, Penn State. I guess at Maryland is like kind of hard. At Washington, at UCLA. Actually, speaking of, did you see that coach's opening statement to Sean Foster at Big Ten Media Days?
I saw a headline saying, I would rather have my coach admit he likes driving drunk than do whatever Foster did. I didn't watch the video yet, though.
Did Mike Gundy come out of Media Days looking a little bit better than Deshaun Foster? I wouldn't go that far, but man, it was really bad. You should watch it. It's like so painfully awkward that I honestly could barely get through it. By the end of it, I was like, oh my God, I need to move on. But anyway, USC plays at UCLA and at home against Notre Dame to close out the season. I'm with you. I don't think the rivalry is going anywhere, but I will say that I think it's actually more likely that Notre Dame joins the Big Ten and the rivalry continues that way, as opposed to Notre Dame staying independent and it just going away entirely. I'm not saying that one or both of those things is going to happen anytime soon, but I just really find it hard to believe that both of these schools, both of these institutions would just sort of agree to let a rivalry that is played every single year, with the exception of, I think it was like 3 years during World War II and the COVID year. Like, these teams play every single year. It's one of the greatest rivalries in all of college football. And even though USC is going to face a much more difficult schedule year in and year out with 9 Big Ten games, they still need a marquee non-conference game. Now they have this in the fold, and they know that they're in the Big Ten, so they're not going to be scheduling LSU or Ole Miss to open the season like they did in the past. And I think they'll just kind of schedule around that, with Notre Dame as basically being like the 10th Power 5 game.
I agree. I do have a question. Do you think this rivalry means more to Notre Dame fans or SC fans?
Notre Dame.
I agree, like almost wholeheartedly. Part of the reason is because SC fans went away for about a decade after the Pete Carroll era. They just went and hid in the wilderness, and then they came out when Caleb came back. But I agree.
They also have UCLA, like a hometown rival, and not to say that they look at that the same way, but it's kind of like they already have one. Notre Dame doesn't have another rival on their schedule that comes anywhere close to USC, at least in my opinion. I mean, if they were playing Michigan every single year, obviously that would come close, but they don't anymore. So to me,
Right.
USC is far and away their biggest rival. It's definitely the team who I dislike the most. You feel the same way. So I think the general consensus among Notre Dame fans is that they care a lot about the USC rivalry, whereas I feel like some USC fans, like, they probably want to keep it on the schedule. I'm sure the older generation definitely does, but like the younger generation of USC fans, I don't think they care nearly as much about it.
I agree. And that's actually the reason why I asked fans, because to players, this might sound crazy, but I don't know that it matters as much to the players, is particularly in this day and age, as it might to some fans, just because I don't know how many of these guys know the history of the rivalry. I remember Brian Kelly saying something to that effect a couple of years ago too, and I think it's a fair point.
I would guess that there's more guys in the current Notre Dame team that feel more animosity towards Clemson than probably any other school, given the way that they performed in that game last year. I mean, we've talked about this before, as the Clemson game started becoming like this budding rivalry. It's a shame that they don't play each other this year, because that has become, one of the most fun games to watch on the schedule. I think they're pretty like-minded in the way that the football programs are structured and the way that they want to be, the way that they want to play. But USC is kind of interesting because I feel like Notre Dame is in a lot of recruiting battles with USC, despite the fact that they're at complete opposite corners of the country. I mean, Tanu Kynes is one example. He just committed to USC over Notre Dame, although I do think that Notre Dame's interest in him, I think it might have waned a little bit there at the end. Kingston Viliamu-Asa last year, Madden Faremo. Like, there's a lot of guys that are deciding between Notre Dame and USC, but I don't know if that makes it more intense or if it actually makes the rivalry a little bit more relaxed if these guys are considering going to two different rival schools.
No arguments from me on that one. Yeah, it's a good question, but I would agree.
One thing we have not mentioned that I think is important, I didn't even know this before today started. Notre Dame is only under contract to play USC through 2026, which means that there's probably at least been some initial discussions about the future of the rivalry. Again, we both think that it's going to continue, but I think that's the reason why it's being brought up now. And the fact that it's coming up this close, I mean, that means they're locked into play this season and the next 2 years. But considering how teams schedule in college football, even in the age of conference realignment where you're scheduling games like a decade out, I feel like we're probably going to find out an answer here maybe in the next couple months.
Yeah, I was thinking that could easily be an August news dump, so very good chance that is the case.
Luke is going to be back with me here in a second to go over our 5 burning questions before Notre Dame enters training camp next week. But first, I wanted to tell you about Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. And with great last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. Whether you've been planning to go to a game for weeks, or if you're feeling spontaneous and you want to hit up the nearby ballpark, Gametime is the perfect place for you. I just recently used Gametime to go to a Dodgers game a couple weeks ago. It wasn't even in my plans. Then I was like, you know what? That sounds like fun. I looked at the app, saw how cheap the tickets were. I was like, you know what? I'm going to go, and ended up having a great time, all thanks to Gametime. It is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat on your phone before you buy, but my favorite thing about Gametime is the pricing shows your total cost up front, and you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, I feel like we've covered it with the USC rivalry. Now let's get to our 5 burning questions before training camp. Training camp starts just under a week from today, and I feel like all offseason, the way we've talked about this team this upcoming season, expectations are high. There's plenty of reasons for optimism, but there are still some serious questions that need to be answered over the course of these next few weeks, and that could shape this entire season. So for you, what is the biggest, most burning question you have as the Irish hit the practice field here in just a few days?
Number one for me is, can Jack Kaiser be a full-time player? People have talked about how productive he's been in less action, but the question to me is, why has there been less action? the most snaps he's ever actually played in a season was way back in 2021, which is kind of hard to believe, but his snap count went down by about 90 snaps from 2021 to 2022. And then last year he was at right around 330 snaps on the season. But it's curious to me, can he do this full time? I mean, I just don't know. This is a guy that played 6 snaps against Ohio State last year. You kind of have to think there's a reason. Now, if he's not a full-time player, is there a young linebacker who can come in and be that guy? Maybe, but I think that there's a big built-in assumption that he's going to be the guy directing guys around out there and telling them what to do. And I just, in the back of my head, that's a big assumption to make, and there's some risk in that.
Yeah, I think it's totally fair to be concerned. I think the main difference there is Bertrand was just better than him throughout all those years. You think back to 2021 when Bertrand came in and he was dealing with that wrist injury. Like, they were dealing with a lot of injuries at linebacker. Hell, Jack Kaiser scored 2 touchdowns that year. He had the interception return against Wisconsin, and I think he had like a fumble recovery for a touchdown when Notre Dame beat Georgia Tech by like 1,000,000 points. But I think when you look at this year, I don't expect him to ever come off the field, mostly because they need him out there sort of directing everyone on the defense. So I'll actually skip ahead to my 4th biggest question because it's related to what we're talking about right now. Which young linebacker will separate from the pack? Because if Jack Kaiser's out there on every single play, that probably means that there's only going to be one other linebacker on the field. I mean, technically Notre Dame has a 4-3 defense, but their base is nickel now, which means there's only 2 linebackers on the field. So if Kaiser's taking up one spot, that really only leaves one other spot for a young cast of characters to get out on the field. So is it going to be Drake Bowen playing the true Mike? Is it going to be Kingston Biliamuasa playing as a true freshman? Is Jalen Sneed going to be in there? Could it be Jane Osbury? Like, I really don't know. It could just end up being a rotation amongst all those guys in a way that we haven't seen in several years. So maybe Jack Kaiser, even if he's not in every down back, he's still going to be out there a lot. But there is an opportunity for these young guys to step in and make a name for themselves. And I just have a feeling that it's going to be one guy, that the coaching staff is going to feel a lot more comfortable with 2 guys and then everyone else sort of chipping in, as opposed to just constantly rotating between Sneed, Bowen, and all those guys you just mentioned.
Yeah, this might sound crazy, but it almost is better to have that one guy as opposed to splitting it up across multiple, because when you do the latter, it's almost like you don't have confidence in anyone. If you don't have one linebacker, you don't have any. It's kind of that. So I'm with you on that, and I hope that that's the case, that somebody rises at the top there.
There's the possibility, too, that like they rotate a little bit on the defensive line. Maybe they try to move Sneed down, and then he's playing as more of an edge rusher, which opens up another linebacker spot. So you do have 3 linebackers on the field. So then in that case, you're in more of like a 3-3-5. And there actually has been some like quiet discussion, I feel like, going on behind the scenes about a potential switch to more of a 3-3-5 defense. It doesn't really make sense for Notre Dame to do that this year when they have Howard Cross and Riley Mills, 2 elite defensive tackles. But I've heard that kind of thrown around as Notre Dame recruits guys, and you've heard whispers that they want to change the structure of their defense in the future. Again, I don't think we're going to see that this year, but it's something to think about going forward.
Absolutely.
All right, what's next in your list of burning questions?
Really, this could be number 1 because it's all I'm thinking about right now can Notre Dame win at College Station? This is their most important season opener since 2018 Michigan. And I believe that because going into 2022, Ohio State, I didn't think they had a chance to win that ball game. And while I thought they probably wouldn't lose to Marshall the next week and then have a better season, there wasn't the same kind of buildup and pressure for me, because I think there was real pressure with this game in that I expect Notre Dame to win it, but they easily could lose it, just like I felt with that Michigan game in 2018. And when Notre Dame won that Michigan game in 2018, it set the table for the whole rest of the season to go 12-0. I feel the same way about this one. So that's question number 2 for me. It easily could be number 1.
Yeah, once Notre Dame cleared Michigan in 2018, you looked at the rest of the schedule and you're like, wow, things really open up after this game. And then they almost lost to Ball State, and then they almost lost to Vanderbilt. And
then you're thinking after Labor Day night, I remember watching this game at the Backer, Virginia Tech took Florida State out to the woodshed. And you're like, oh, okay, that game in Blacksburg in a couple of weeks might be a pretty darn good game. I'm excited for that. Turns out Florida State was horrible that year, and Virginia Tech turned around and lost to Old Dominion, like either the next week or a couple weeks later. So, you never really know.
And then that Ohio State game, Notre Dame was what, like 17-point dogs in that?
And they were ranked number 5.
Truly just the weirdest matchup of all time, too, because that was Tyler Buckner making his first start. And all things considered, I thought he did fine.
That might have been the best start of his career.
It really might have been. Which is,
I mean, he had 3 of them, but you know,
that's true.
4, I guess, kind of the Bama one.
Yeah, he won the MVP of the Gator Bowl despite throwing 2 pick sixes that could have easily derailed any chance of winning. I'm going to look up his stat line in that one because
it looks like how I've looked playing NCAA 25.
Yeah, 10 of 18, 177 yards. I think like 80 of them were on that first play of the game when Lorenzo Styles took like a hitch route and then got hawked down there. But yeah, he actually played all right in that matchup. But you're right. I did not give Notre Dame any sort of a shot going into that game. So even though it was like, oh, wow, the season starts in this big season opener, top 5 matchup on the road, we were basically all chalking up as like, okay, Notre Dame is 0-1 to start the year. But going up against Texas A&M, even though they're underdogs, like they should win that game. But you're right, it's going to be tricky. I think it's just going to be a game, in my opinion, that when it's over, you know, hopefully they win, and then we're just like, thank God that's behind us. Now let's move on, because I never want to even think about that game again.
Totally. So that's always a sweet way to start the year.
It's plenty to look forward to. Okay, my first question here, my most burning question before camp is, how bad is the biggest weakness? Because there's an old saying that goes, you're only as fast as your slowest team member, or you're only as strong as your weakest link, basically saying that no matter how good everything else you have is, if you have one really, really slow team member, a really weak spot in your unit, that's going to affect everything. And in the case of this Notre Dame season, I think that's especially true because you look at pretty much every position group on the roster, they all look like they're loaded with the big exception, and that's at the offensive line. I talked about this yesterday. I think it's the weakest link on the team, but I also think that there's a chance that they could end up being pretty solid this year, but the disparity in what they could be is pretty significant. The best case scenario is really good. The worst case scenario is really bad. So you compare that to the rest of the team. If they're just able to be above average, then if that's your weakest link, the team is going to be awesome.
100%. And I think even take this to a different position group here. We all think the wide receivers are much improved based on some of the guys that got in the portal and just the benefit of getting older. What if they stink again too? Then what is Riley Leonard? Then you're just kind of running Riley Leonard around like a rag doll out there. And that's another concern. Like how bad is the biggest weakness is probably the best way to put that, because that's sort of your barometer for how low the floor is.
So you'd put wide receivers as maybe like second worst going into the season?
I hope not. But we've been burned so many times by these guys. It's kind of like you just have to wait to see it.
Yeah. You want to know my 5th most burning question?
Sure.
Will the wide receivers finally live up to our expectations? Because of all my preseason takes last year, I think I was most wrong about the wide receivers, and I was wrong probably about a lot. But the wide receivers, I just felt like, given the fact that Caleb Smith left the team and he was a pretty productive player at Virginia Tech, transfers over, and then you start hearing he's not even in the rotation. You're thinking, oh, wow, this is actually going to be a good unit. Finally, Tobias Merriweather is going to really show what he's capable of. And then he did basically nothing for Notre Dame last year. The freshman receivers were good, but I think Rico Flores eventually hit a wall, and then Jane Greathouse just got hurt. Deion Colsey also got hurt last year. So, it wasn't entirely their fault, but it does seem like every single year, with the exception of like 2 years ago when we knew they were going to be awful, there was no reason for optimism there. It was just like, can they just survive this season?
Well, hey, that's actually not entirely what we thought. I think we were both pretty high on Lorenzo Styles going into that season, and now he is a backup defensive back at Ohio State.
That's true. Yeah, that's right. So I guess I'm thinking 3 years ago.
I mean, I think we all knew they sucked 2 years ago. We just didn't say that on the face.
Yeah, that's true. But still, there's plenty of reasons to be excited about what the receiver room is going to look like this year with Bo Collins, Chris Mitchell, Jaden Harrison in the transfer portal, a healthy Jaden Thomas and Jane Greathouse. Jordan Faison is kind of like, despite how productive he was at the end of last year, almost like a wild card because he wasn't around in the spring and he was playing lacrosse. So, again, this team actually is guys who you can say they have proven to be good at wide receiver at the college level, where we have not always been able to say that. And it's now I just need to see it on the field on Saturdays.
Now, the predecessor to their success is my third question here, and it's, can Riley Leonard throw the football? Because if you were to go back to what I was saying on this show in September of 2023, I really couldn't believe how much hype he was getting based on his passing statistics for the season. And I'm still not sold he can throw the ball. I know he wins the Manning Passing Academy Accuracy Award, and that's awesome. I'd much rather have him win that than the alternative. But this is another thing where I think with seeing how the Sam Hartman experience went last year, I just must be really worried about getting hurt again or something, because I'm not ready. I'm not all the way there yet, and I'm not sure that he can throw the football.
I've been watching a lot of 2015 highlights lately. Part of it is me making the conscious decision to do that. But then like yesterday, I was scrolling on Twitter and someone posted like a 3.5 minute long video of Notre Dame versus Temple that season. And I was like genuinely shocked at how many designed runs Notre Dame ran for Deshaun Kaiser. Like, I knew that he ran the ball a lot. I knew that he set like the single season record for rushing touchdowns by a quarterback. Like, I knew that he was a big part of the offense. But when you really see it and how often they went to him, and then you think about what they could do with Riley Leonard this year, because they're going to have Mike Denbrock as the offensive coordinator. Like, the more I think about it, I don't even know if him throwing it is going to be that big of a factor. Now, obviously, you're going to need the quarterback to make some throws to win some games. But, like, I think I've underestimated how important he's going to be as a runner throughout this offseason. And the closer we get to the start of the year, like, I think he's going to be the team's second leading rusher. And they have two great running backs in Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love.
Let's be honest, this team has won a lot of games over the past decade without a real threat to throw the football. I mean, that's kind of how they've won games. And so I think this is going to be the differentiator. If Notre Dame's going to truly be a playoff run contender, championship contender, he's going to have to separate himself and be able to throw the football. Otherwise, they can be a 10-11 win team, make the playoff even, but like, to me, that's not going to be that different from what we've seen the last decade.
Okay, so give me your expectations for him as a thrower. Like, what you think of him right now as a passing quarterback. We'll say on a scale of like 0 to 10, with like 0 being Brandon Wimbush, who couldn't even throw like a little flare route, and 10 being like Trevor Lawrence at his peak. What do you think he is as a passer?
I was going to say 6, probably. Which is slightly above average.
So
right?
Worse than Ian Book, I would say? Because Ian Book was accurate. He just couldn't really throw it deep.
Yeah. I think Ian Book also in 2018 versus really the rest of his career was a completely different quarterback. Like, I think that was probably his best year when he was just distributing the ball around, outside of one drive against Clemson in 2020. But yeah, I would say like maybe a 6, which is slightly above average, and that's fine. With as good as the rest of the team is, you'll win a lot of football games playing that way, but I just don't know if it's enough to get to the next level.
While we were kind of talking about the receivers, I was thinking about a lot of the guys I mentioned, like Jordan Faison, Jane Greathouse, Jane Tom, even Mitchell Evans, the tight end. Like, Chris Mitchell is the only guy who's considered like a bona fide deep threat.
Blazer.
Yeah. So I don't think he's going to be throwing it deep a lot. I think a lot of it is going to be just like spreading the ball around to guys in space. And I'm fine with that, because like Faison, if he gets the ball on like a 5-yard slant route, like odds are he's making one guy miss. He doesn't need to be like layering the ball deep down the field. Now, in third and obvious passing situations, you're going to need him to make some tight window throws that are down the field. But I think the more I watch Riley Leonard and I think about what the Mike Denbrock offense is going to look like, I really don't think he's going to be asked to do a ton. And I say that, and the first thing that comes to my mind is J.J. McCarthy, who somehow went in the first round of the NFL draft. But like, how often was he making big time throws? Part of that had to do with their schedule and the fact that they just crushed every team they played. But like, even in the big games, how many times did J.J. McCarthy need to make like a deep throw down the field in tight coverage? Not really that often.
I mean, and neither of those Michigan teams the last 2 years had guys who could really take the top off the defense. I mean, there was just kind of that inexplicable quarter in the Ohio State game in 2022 where I don't know what the Ohio State defense was doing, and they had some big plays. But outside of that, like it's not like they're having a ton of explosive plays through the air. So your point is well received. It's just a concern of mine, and I think 9 times out of 10 would tell us you kind of need that type of guy to be that sort of team.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what Mike Danbrock asks him to do. I mean, as long as he's not just throwing picks everywhere, like as long as he doesn't turn into Sam Hartman at Louisville, he should be fine. And in his career, like he had 1 pick last year in limited action, 6 the year before, and he had 3 last season, 6 the year before, and then 1 when he was just a sophomore. So I don't know. We'll see. But as long as he protects the football, then I think we should be fine. Okay, my third most pressing question here. It's my second one. It relates to Riley Leonard. How healthy is, air quotes, healthy? Because 3 of Notre Dame's most important players this season, Benjamin Morrison, Mitchell Evans, and Riley Leonard, all have health concerns going into camp. Now, I know that it sounds like Riley Leonard is full go. He's ready to go from the very first practice. Benjamin Morrison's status is up in the air. I think he's like maybe at the start of camp. And then Mitchell Evans is supposed to be ready to go as well. All of this according to Marcus Freeman. But we know that Marcus Freeman has not always been 100% truthful when it comes to injuries and specifically players' recovery time from those injuries. So until I see every single one of those guys out in the field being a full participant in practice, I am going to be worried about their health for the Texas A&M game and really throughout the early portion of the season.
Totally fair concern. And I honestly, weirdly enough, I think if I had to rank these guys in terms of how confident I am that they're truly healthy or good to go, from most confident to least, I think I would go Evans, Leonard, and then Morrison, just because I feel like the conversation around Morrison has been the weirdest and kind of the most mysterious, if you will. I don't think that Freeman would say that Evans was good to go if he wasn't, just based on the nature of that injury when it happened. And it's a tight end and not like a skill player. I don't know. That's just kind of my read on that. Could be wrong. But yeah, that's kind of how I see it. And I agree. I think that's going to be a concern until maybe we get to like the Georgia Tech game. So yeah, I'll have that concern for a while.
The thing is, with these injuries, we saw all of them happen except Morrison. I mean, the Benjamin Morrison alert was like a tweet from Notre Dame PR. And it was like, Benjamin Morrison underwent successful surgery on his shoulder that will force him to miss the remainder of spring practice. And it's just like, it was like a random day. It's a random news stump in the middle of my day. And you're like, wait a second, what? Shoulder surgery seems serious. That's going to take a while to recover from. And I would say that of all the guys, Marcus Freeman had the most concern, at least publicly, about his ability to participate in training camp. And, you know, maybe he's able to recover from that, but it's also a shoulder injury. And as we know, those have a tendency to linger. So I think that they're going to be very cautious with him throughout the early portion of camp and then try to get him ready to go against Texas A&M. But, you know, when Notre Dame's defense takes the field for the first time, that is going to be the first thing I'm looking at. Is Benjamin Morrison out there?
Yeah. No kidding.
And how does he look when he's out there? Like, if there's a running play going at him, is he ready to just stick his nose in there and make the tackle, or is he just playing a little bit far back? Because I think I am most concerned about him compared to any of these other guys.
Yeah, we're on the same page, it sounds like then. While we're on the topic of injuries, fourth question. How hurt was Jordan Clark last year? Because I feel like the beat and guys that analyze film went from, why is Notre Dame taking this guy? His film is awful. I don't care that he was hurt last year. To all of a sudden, it's like Jordan Clark could be a real player. I think he's actually going to have a nice season. And I'm just wondering, is that because like they want to get a job working for Ryan Clark, or like what's going on? Because that tune seemed to change pretty drastically.
It did. It really did. And, you know, I think there's 2 parts to it. Look, if he's hurt, if he was really hurt as bad as he was, and I have no reason to doubt that his injuries weren't pretty significant, then like, yeah, of course it's going to prevent him from being that good. But right now I'm going through it. I'm pulling up his stats in coverage on Pro Football Focus.
They're
right
not
now,
great.
And I can tell you they are not great at all, as a matter of fact. So they threw at him a lot. Now, granted, whenever you look at these coverage stats, part of it has to do with like the guys around you, and Arizona State was objectively terrible last season. He allowed 49 catches on 73 targets. That's a 67% completion percentage when they threw his way. He allowed 533 yards, 398 of which were after contact, which means that the guys had pretty significant separation on him when they caught the pass. He did not have a single pick. He allowed 3 touchdowns. And, you look at these, and they're not good. But again, the Notre Dame coaching staff has had a pretty good eye for talent in the transfer portal when they really went after guys early on in the process. It's different than, say, Antonio Carter, who they added in, May of last year because they needed an extra depth piece. They pursued Jordan Clark in the transfer portal early. They also had Thomas Harper the year before. So it's they know what they want. They made a move early. So I think we just kind of have to trust the coaching staff there that the film and the stats last year were a little bit deceiving.
Completely forgot about Antonio Carter. It's pretty wild that he was picking between Notre Dame and LSU, and now he's back at...
He's at Jackson State, I think. Jacksonville State.
Jeez. Yeah, that's... oh, no, it's worse. That's his dad coaching at Florida Atlantic. I think you're right. That's crazy.
It happens, man, in the transfer portal. You hear about these guys... I remember there was a guy that Notre Dame was looking at. I don't even know if they gave him a scholarship. Maybe they did give him a scholarship offer. He was a defensive back in the spring portal window, and Notre Dame offered him. Yeah, they definitely offered him because he posted about it. And then I asked some people, what's the deal there? And the consensus was that he was not good. Notre Dame just wanted him because they needed an extra body in the room. But other coaches on Power 4 teams were like, we need this guy to start.
But we're recruiting him too.
He sucks, but we need a starter. And that's sort of the day and age in the transfer portal. You want a guy, and you're like, look, we know he's not good. But that's so much different than the Jordan Clark situation because this is after spring practice. You need bodies. Notre Dame got Jordan Clark in 3 days after the portal opened? And after last season?
Yeah.
And also, Notre Dame has had pretty good luck at the nickel position the past couple of years when Tariq Bracy reached his full potential at that position, and Thomas Harper was really one of the key pieces on the team last year. Okay, let's get to my next one here. Who is this year's Kyron Williams / Benjamin Morrison? So they're two separate people in the way that I'm looking at this because Kyron Williams changed the course of the entire 2020 season by having a breakout year. And
sure did.
Now, granted, it's a little bit different because it was the COVID year, and most people, us included, were not sure that Notre Dame was even going to be playing games. So, there wasn't a whole lot of talk or coverage in the offseason about, different position groups and how Notre Dame was going to play that year because, again, we didn't know if there was going to be football to be played. Then, 2 weeks into training camp that year, the person you heard about most was Kyron Williams, and I was like, Kyron Williams, the running back who barely played at all last season, that looked fat and out of shape in the Louisville game, that's going to be our lead back. And then everyone was like, no, he's literally busting dudes' asses in practice, and he totally transformed his body. I was like, oh, I'll believe it when I see it. Then he comes out in the Duke game, has 2 touchdowns. He's one of the best players in the entire team that year. Is there a guy like that on this year's roster who is going to surprise all of us, who maybe we're talking about a little bit as oh, yeah, this guy might contribute this year, and then ends up being one of the best players on the team? It could happen, or there could be a Benjamin Morrison situation where it's a freshman who didn't early enroll, who ends up just showing out in fall camp and then ends up starting a few games into the season. It's happened before. I'm genuinely curious if it happens this year. I don't even have any candidates in mind. It's just something that I'm going to be looking out for during these next few weeks.
I really hope that there is somebody like that who can change the course of the season. That would be incredible. So I'm with you, and that's definitely something that does seem to happen more times than not, but we can only wait and see.
If there were to be a player to have a true breakout year who's really not being talked about that much right now, who do you think would be? Could be a freshman, could be someone who's been on the roster.
I don't know if this guy totally fits into that bucket because I feel like people are sort of talking about him, but I'm going to say Jalen Sneed.
I was thinking Jalen Sneed. It kind of makes sense. Junior year, he could follow the Chase Claypool career path where came in with a ton of hype, wasn't totally focused, wasn't totally mature his first couple of years, but then he realized, oh yeah, I have this immense ability. What if I just locked in and became dominant? And that's what Chase Claypool did. And then he forgot that, and then when he got in the NFL, he went right back to the Chase Claypool of old, but he did have a couple of years of really good football.
That he did. man, it's pretty remarkable to think just how hard that guy played his senior year. And then by the time he got to the Bears, I don't think he wanted to play football anymore. So things change quick.
Yeah, what was the stat with him? Like he had not won a game and like the team that he was on had not won a game in like I don't even know how long. It was a crazy stretch. He went like 0-16.
Good for him. So did Deshaun Kaiser.
That's true. That's true.
I've got one more. And this is said somewhat in jest, but like I'm kind of serious about it because we have no proof of concept. What if the punter just sucks? James Rendell has like never really played football before, and especially say Notre Dame, gets stopped deep in their own territory, Texas A&M, and he goes out there and he just shanks one. Like I don't think it's that out of the realm of possibility. And if he does suck, who are the other options? Is it Chris Salerno? I don't know who it is.
I understand the sense of it. I would be genuinely shocked if that happens.
It's just interesting, like the philosophies in that special teams room, the kicking and punting almost seem to be in direct opposition to each other because it's become, okay, we're going to just get a transfer and get as much experience as possible every year. And they also got a transfer at punter, but with about as limited amount of experience imaginable in this instance. So I just think it's interesting. And it's one of those things that if you're really a weirdo, it's going to keep you up a little bit and say, do we have a punter? I just don't know.
He's 6'6", dude. So if he can't punt, just like fake it every time. I think he's a good enough athlete to make some plays out there. But the reason why I feel like he has to at least be decent is because they literally sent Marty Biagi down under to go visit him in Australia. And I believe that he punted in front of him. Now it's a little bit different when you're punting in front of a crowded stadium as opposed to just punting in a grassy field. But I feel like the intrigue there with the punting program that he's a part of in Australia, there's been plenty of random guys. I mean, dude, who would have thought that John Sott would be any good when he transferred over to Notre Dame? Now, granted, he had actually punted at the college level when he was at Harvard, but then he came to Notre Dame and it's like one of the best punters in the entire country. So who really knows?
Yeah, I mean, David Ruffer was picked up off the Interhall fields. It's anyone's guess, but I don't know. I like with a lot of these things, I'm just trying to see proof of concept.
All right, I think that about covers it on the burning questions. I've hit mine. You've hit yours. Do you have any final thoughts on the way out?
No, I can't believe it's almost August. I'm excited it is. But wow, we're almost there.
I know. I can't wait. Are you starting to feel like football season is close, or does it still feel like the heat of summer? Because I feel like there's always a moment where you're like, all right, we're here. We're getting there, I should say.
Yeah, I started feeling it maybe a couple weeks ago. The Cubs just being terrible is probably contributing to that too, but I'm there.
That's good to hear. I think for me, once I started playing college football 25, it reminded me of when I was a kid, and I was like, oh yeah, we're here. But the next time we talk to you, camp is going to be in full swing. We'll be even closer to the start of the football season. I'm looking forward to it.
Sounds good.
All right, that is going to do it for today's episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. I'm going to be right back here with you tomorrow morning. In the meantime, remember to subscribe to the show on YouTube and wherever you're listening to podcasts. I'll see you then.